My next guest is a Republican from Florida and a member of the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability and the Committee on Financial Services. Please welcome Congressman Byron Donalds.
How you doing? It's good to be with you.
Thank you so much for being here, Congressman. Again, Black History Month. We would be remiss to not mention the moment that we had just a few weeks ago where we saw history made with almost two Black men leading our Congress. We had a moment where we saw both Representative Hakeem Jeffries and yourself nominated for Speaker of the House. Can you talk a little bit about what that moment meant to you to see that moment of progress with two Black men at the forefront of this conversation?
Well, I mean, look, that time period was a wild one. Obviously, some people aren't really accustomed to seeing in the first week of a new Congress. But being able to be a part of that was profound. It was a little surreal at first because, to be blunt, I was still trying to get my head around what was happening with me at that particular time. But then to kind of take a step back and understand that even though there was a week of heavy negotiations and a lot of movement, that you had myself and Representative Jeffries being nominated from both sides of the political aisle. It is historic. It was monumental. And that's something he and I had a chance to briefly talk about when all the votes were done and everything was settled, especially, two Black men from Brooklyn, New York. It was special. And it was something that I think should never be discounted or just overlooked.
Absolutely, absolutely. Congressman, when we talk about Black voters, oftentimes there's this narrative that Black voters.
I think I lost you guys.
I'm so sorry. Oh, we're having a little bit of technical difficulty. It sounds like I am not able to hear the Congressman and he is not able to hear me. Congressman, are you able to hear me a little bit better? We are having a moment. I'm so sorry. So it is Black History Month, which means that, we are here to celebrate the not just successes that we have seen from Black Americans to this point, but the future that we are going to see from Black Americans, the way that they are shaping our country to this day. We were just listening to Congressman Byron Donalds from Florida.
All right, I think I got you guys back. I apologize. My fault. I apologize.
Oh, we have the Congressman back. Perfect. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Congressman. We were discussing how there's often this narrative when it comes to Black voters that Black voters don't vote for Republicans. You and I know that's false. What can we do to help dispel that narrative? And are there things that the Republican Party is doing to help encourage Black voters to vote for them more?
Well, look, this is where I'm critical of Republicans. And I've been that way for quite some time. The Republican Party historically really hasn't done much of anything to try to court Black voters. I think that members of my party have talked about the issues that they support, the values that they support, but they've not taken the time to go into communities and say, hey, let's build a relationship. Let me explain to you what we mean when we talk about a lower tax base and policy. What do we mean when we talk about financial regulatory reforms? What does it mean when we talk about education reform and what that means to children who grow up at various parts of our economy across the country? That's work in the Republican Party that's starting to change, that's starting to move, in my view, in a positive way. Because, taking a step back and understanding, Black culture and even Black people, we are across the political spectrum when it comes to values and thought processes. But I think what happens is that, the Democrat Party has consistently sought Black votes for a very long time. The Republican Party hasn't done that work, but that's something that's changing. It's something that I advocate for every single day. And that's going to continue to evolve if I have anything to say about it.
Absolutely. Congressman, we were just hearing from Alicia Garza, and a few of our other speakers today will also touch a little bit on racial justice. What can you tell us that the Republican Party is doing when it comes to racial justice?
Well, the number one thing we want to make sure we have is that our police are supported in every community in the country. I grew up in the inner city. You can't have safe streets without the police. I think the thing that nobody wants to see, obviously, are elements of police brutality. Nobody wants to see the targeting of people. And so when the federal government comes in and says, okay, let's provide funding for body cameras or for training, that's the stuff that Republicans are about. My colleague in the Senate, Tim Scott, authored a bill about this very topic right after, during the summer of 2020, he authored that bill. That bill didn't get out of the Senate, and I'm not going to get into the politics as to why, but it didn't get out of the Senate. That's something that's on the table that many Republicans, virtually all Republicans that I speak to, support. We want to make sure that law enforcement has the tools to do its job, because if you don't have safe streets, how is a young black kid in Chicago or New York or Miami or Oakland or Los Angeles going to be able to just, get to school on time, be able to get, feel safe in their own community? We want that to occur. At the same time, we want to make sure that everything's being done, that the justice system is operating equally across the board. And so that's where House Republicans are. That's where Republicans are in general. And we're committed to that work.
The country is still reeling from the video that we saw of Tyre Nichols beating, and you yourself did comment and you called the actions abhorrent. Where do you see the federal government playing a part in this police reform? Does it have to come from the federal level, or does this need to be more of a community, state-based reform that we see?
Well, I think it's important for people to understand, and I have the ability, having served at the state level in Florida and now at the federal level. Most police reform proposals, most training funding apparatuses, that happens at the state level and at the local level. The federal government can provide additional funding or supplemental funding, but most of that happens at state government and local government. So if a community wants to really have a hands-on approach to making sure that the training is operating the way it should for new officers coming into the force, that's mostly handled at the local level with your police chief, with your sheriff. That's where that stuff occurs. I think the one thing we also have to take stock of and understand is that if you have a situation in your community where the standards for officers coming into the force is lowered, it leaves all of us susceptible to some of the things that we saw in that video. What happened there was a tragedy for our country, a tragedy, obviously, for the Nichols family and for everybody that knows them and cares for them. But we got to be careful when we set public policy with respect to policing. It has to be at the local level. That's where the people are hired. That's where they are trained. That's where people's sheriffs and chiefs of police typically are elected by that community in that area. The federal government's side is to come in and provide support, mostly through funding, but actually not through policy. And so it's important for everybody to understand, if you want to have that direct action, it starts at the local level primarily.
When we talk about racial justice, there's a lot that goes into that, and a very large part of that is economic justice as well. It means being able to have access, particularly to things like the labor market, and being able to build businesses. I know that the COVID-19 pandemic wreaked havoc on small businesses across our country, but right now there's been a lot of discussion about how particularly Black-owned businesses suffered during the pandemic. They did bear the brunt of some of the economic crisis of the pandemic that we saw. And though there is still recovery happening, we're not entirely out of the pandemic just yet. So questions are now circulating about how we can continue to support Black businesses and help them recover as we move forward through the hopefully end of this pandemic.
This is a great question. It's something that I take a lot of focus on with my responsibilities being on the House Financial Services Committee. A couple of things. The number one issue we have with funding or helping, small businesses, micro businesses, where you have a lot of black entrepreneurs trying to create a micro business to get started, their fledgling ideas, or to continue to build their business. A lot of that starts with the fact that our banking system is really a top-down heavy system. And this is in part because of bad financial regulatory policy from the previous financial collapse back in 2008. If you look at a chart of community banks across the country, they've been destroyed to the tune of 80% in our banking system over the past 12 to 15 years. Meanwhile, the large banks have only gotten massively bigger. So what does that mean to a mom and pop in any city in America? What that means to a small Black business owner is unless you have a very deep banking relationship with somebody at Bank of America or Wells Fargo or Citigroup, it's hard to get access to capital, especially with something like the pandemic where money was going through the banks, but there's not a lot of banks that operate in a lot of communities. There's hardly any community banks that operate in communities anymore. If we want Black business owners to be able to access capital, if we want Black people to have more tools to get at the economic system, we have to actually do a strong, hard look at reforming the financial regulatory markets. Number one, we have to start opening up more pathways for financial technology so people can access dollars, whether it's through their smartphone or through their computer, without actually having to go to a banking location. Number two, we need more community banks because, like I said, if you're a micro business, you employ 3 to 4 people. It is so difficult to build a banking relationship with a national bank. And I want to stress to people, if you have a bank account, that is not a banking relationship. A banking relationship is when you know the loan officer, when you know the branch manager, and you engage with them on a regular basis. That's a banking relationship. But financial regulatory policy in Washington has destroyed a lot of that. We have to build it back. Those are some of the solutions that I believe are going to be critical for Black people to be able to achieve economic equality in the United States.
Are you hopeful? Do you have hope that we're going to be able to see that economic equality come true? That these ideas that you have could be passed and come to terms in Congress? I know it's divided right now, but are you hopeful at least?
I mean, I'm hopeful because the proof of what I'm saying is right there for everybody to see. I think the big argument in Washington is about consumer protections. And that's an argument between Republicans and Democrats. Republicans favor a much more open regulatory environment. Democrats tend to favor one based on consumer protections, which is a harder regulatory environment. But the problem with the consumer protection piece is it cuts down the avenues for people to access capital. So look, when I was growing up in the inner city, what was more important to me? Not being able to get into a loan product, or being able to actually have access to all the different options in front of me as I was building my life. I want to have access to the options. I think it's incumbent upon me and my family to make sure that we're doing things to protect ourselves. But I need the options. I need the avenues. I need the ladders to be successful. So I think in Congress, as long as, keep it moving forward with that argument, I think we can be successful because it's people who are either starting at the bottom or they've grown up in a 2-parent home and they've had some ability to have some additional cash to help them, or they got introduced to somebody with a good idea and they could partner with that person. There's different levels that people are operating from today in the Black community. What we got to make sure we do is have the channels open and have the access points open through more possibilities and more conduits so those things can be achieved.
Congressman, my final question for you, again, thank you so much for being here today. If you had to offer some words of encouragement for any of our Black Americans looking to go into starting their own business, what would you want to tell them?
The first thing I would say is, listen, don't give in, don't give up. If it's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy. Most small businesses fail, but it's through that process of pushing through the hard work that all the possibilities really open for you. In this life, nothing's given to any of us. We have to go out there and earn it every single day. It definitely is possible. It's something that can be done, but you have to find a way to persevere, to pursue it and push through it. Second piece of advice, I would contact whoever is your congressional representative. Contact that office. Ask what all the different tools that are available out there, because there are a lot of tools available, whether it's SBA or other programs that exist through the banking system. Really do your homework on that. Find those additional tools, find those additional helps. Look, at the end of the day, the American economy is the most vibrant thing on the face of the planet in the history of the planet Earth. And so the big thing we want to do on Capitol Hill is make sure that the regulatory state and the law doesn't stand in the way of your success. But your success is always going to start with you, your drive, your ingenuity, your God-given talent. And if you continue to pursue it, you're going to achieve it.
Congressman Byron Donalds, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Anytime. Thank you.